Presbyterian church, when people take out chairs to sit farther in the back, I'm just teasing you. I know you guys wanted to sit together, but anyway, let's pray, and then we'll talk about Jesus' childhood. Please pray with me. O great and good God, like Jesus in the Jordan River, may we long to hear you say, "This is my beloved child, in whom I am well pleased." Like Jesus in the garden on the eve of his death, grant us the self-surrender that desires that your will be done, not ours. Like Jesus sitting at your right hand, may we one day be welcomed into your eternal presence and hear you say to us, your beloved children, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Amen. Okay, so we're going to talk about this window on childhood. My hunch is that many of you are farther along in this than I am, that you went to the Visio Divina on Wednesday. Many of you are coming from the first service. I don't know what was said in either of those places, right, yet. We'll go to the second service and hear the sermon. And I haven't had a whole lot of time to spend with looking at the image this week, other than to notice the basic things, right? We get this right in the middle. We have the image of Jesus in the temple, right? We get this one little story in the whole Bible of him as a child, but as an older child, like he's becoming an adult. I mean, it's worth pointing out what happens to contemporary Jewish boys and girls when they're 12 years old. A bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, right? So that isn't a thing that Jews are doing yet in Jesus' time, but there's some early forms of it, and that's probably what's happening here. Right, that's probably has something to do with why he's in the temple. I mean, the family's gone down for a festival, right? But why he's talking to the people that he's talking to probably has something to do with some kind of a coming of age thing that's happening, right? We'll come back to all that, right? And then we get other scenes at the top from his childhood, basically him learning the trade of carpentry, right? And then at the bottom we get some other Old Testament scenes of childhood, in particular Samuel. And the reason for that is there's all kinds, if you read this Luke chapter 2 story, we would read the whole thing, which has got like things in it about Jesus' birth, right? The angels and all of that coming. It's the Christmas story. There's things in common between Jesus' kind of early birth stories and the Samuel story. They're oftentimes paired, right? The other passage that got linked to this is John 5. If you read John 5, it's a very deep sort of reflection on the relationship of the Father and the Son. This time we're not talking the human Father and the Son, but the divine Father and divine Son. It's a passage used to talk about the Trinity, right? And at first, I was really unclear to me why they were paired. I read the passage a couple of times and I went, I don't see the connection. But then I did. We'll talk about that. But I actually think it might be worth for us to read these two passages, right? If you don't want to read out loud, just say pass. But you got it on a handout. Can we just go around the room and read both of them? Mary Jane, you want to start?
Yeah, we're on mine.
So the very top, Luke 2, starting at verse 39, we'll read the whole thing, and then we'll just keep going with the other one.
Okay, when they had finished everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. The child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. That's an anthem. Now, every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up, as usual, for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. But his parents were unaware of this. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they were a day's journey. But they started to look among their relatives and friends. And when they did not see him or find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously looking for you." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he had said to them. But he went down and with them and came down to Nazareth, or came to Nazareth, when was obedient to them. And his mother treasured all those things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years, and in divine and human favor.
Thank you. Someone want to read the other one? Thank you, Gail.
I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek to do not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. If I testify about myself, my testimony is not true. There is another who testifies on my behalf, and I know that his testimony to me is true. You sent messengers to John, and he testified to the truth. Not that I accept such human testimony, but I say these things so that you may be saved. He was a burning and shining lamp, and you were willing to rejoice for a while in his light. But I have a testimony greater than John's, the works that the Father has given me to complete. The very works that I am doing testify on my behalf. The Father has sent me, and the Father who sent me has himself testified on my behalf. You have never heard his voice or seen his form, and you do not have his word abiding in you, because you do not believe in him he has sent. You search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life, and it is they that testify on my behalf. Yet you refuse to come to me to have life. I do not accept glory from humans, but I know that you do not have the love of God in you. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not accept me. If another comes in his own name, you will accept him. How can you believe when you accept glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes to you from the one who alone is God? Do not think that I will accuse you before the Father. Your accuser is Moses, on whom you have set your hope. If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you do not believe what he wrote, how will you believe what I said?
Thanks be to God. Right? So, do you see a connection? Is there a theme in both? It's really hard to see, I think. It would help to read more of John 5. So here's the hint I'll give you. The very first verse of the John 5 passage, I can do nothing on my own, could also be interpreted as something like, I don't have my own authority. It's obedience. He's obedient to his mom and dad in the first story, right? And here he's telling us, everything I do because the Father told me. I'm just doing the Father's will. I think that's the connection. And it actually makes a sense, I think, once you see it. So let's unpack it a bit, right? There's some fun things in here too. So first of all, right, how many other stories do we have about Jesus in between his birth and, him beginning his ministry, being baptized by John the Baptist? This is the one. We have zero other stories. Yep.
Do we have anything like the Jewish people do, the Midrash, where we have stories that have been kind of added on?
So hundreds of years later, so we're talking 500-600 AD.
Okay.
we do get a genre of texts that they get oftentimes titled infancy gospels, because they're people telling stories about what Jesus did when he was a kid, right? They kind of go in between his birth and this story. We don't really get anything after, right?
Like making animals that...
Yeah, so like I would call them, they're basically fan fiction. It's like,
Washington cutting down.
well, it's kind of like that, but it's more like kids right now will like, I mean, this is kind of old. They're probably doing with different things now, but people will write stories about, let's say, Harry Potter. They'll write their own stories and post them online. That's the kind of thing that they are. And they're really strange. Like he's like, you kind of alluding to one of the more famous ones of, he's making like, he's playing in the mud. You can picture Jesus being like 5 or 6 years old, and this other kid comes through and kicks his mud castle over, and Jesus just goes and kills him. And then the parents get angry, as you would, and Jesus goes fine, and he brings the kid back to life, right? Or he's making animals out of the mud, and then he blows on them when they come alive, right? I mean, it's silly things, right? He goes to school and the teachers get angry at him because he's not paying attention, and he basically goes, I know all of this, and he shows off, and he knows everything, right? So they're not actually very, very good or very accurate, but we do have some of these things, right? So there's these texts, we call them the infancy gospels, and they're basically written in about 500 or 600, and they really are written because people wanted to know. They wanted to know, they wanted stories about what Jesus was like as a kid.
And do people read these days?
Scholars read them to like see what people want to know, but like I don't think anybody's reading them in their churches and thinking this is a scripture. Yeah, well, that's a good, I think. Right, but yes, there are these things, ideas that float around, but we don't have anything. Yep.
Well, isn't it true that you translated one of these?
Yeah, well, I mean, so like yes, Dale and I were talking about this earlier, but like my undergraduate degree was in classics, Greek and Latin, right? And one of my assignments, what I got in the class, was we had to translate the whole text, right? So this is why I know about it, right? And scholars read these things, but they're obscure things, right? You can find them. You can find English translations of them, but right. But again, it's really written out of someone wanted to tell the story about what Jesus was like as a kid, right? And so, but like, think about what they're doing. They're writing a story as if he already has all this power, right? As if he already like fully has all of the divine powers that he has, and he knows everything, right? And think how that doesn't match at all with the accounts we just read, right? It's telling us about him, right? He grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and God's favor was upon him. That's the first part of that Luke story. And at the end, it also says, Jesus increased in wisdom and years and in divine and human favor. Like this is the thing. Jesus had to be potty trained. Right? He didn't just know everything. Like that's not the story the Bible tells us, right? He grows up. He learns, right?
I don't know whether you like that metaphor.
Right? This is the point I want to make is like he had to do everything that like every other kid has to do. I mean, our creeds say he's fully God, but also that he's fully human, right? So I mean, he didn't like come out of the womb speaking. In a couple of these infancy gospels, he does. He like is born from Mary and stands up and prophesies, right? This is the mixing of the Jesus story with all kinds of pagan myths, and I mean that's why I call it Christian fiction from a certain time, right? But this isn't what the Bible actually tells us. Like he grows up, right? This is complete speculation on my part. Like this, I can't root this in a text. But if I had to guess what Jesus was doing between age 12 and age 30 when he shows up and gets baptized and has a ministry, sometime in there, I would guess in his early 20s, Jesus figures out who he is. I'm the Son of God. I think he went out into the wilderness for a decade to figure out what the heck he's going to do with his life when he figured out who he was. That's a completely speculative point, right? But the Bible does portray Jesus as growing up and learning. At some point, he figures out who he is and what God has called him to do. And a sane person, that would send them into a crisis. I'm supposed to go die for everyone else's sins. That's a pretty heavy weight on one's shoulders, right?
But then what does he say there in this story?
Yeah.
Didn't you know that I had to be in my Father's house?
Right, so I think,
Page 12.
right, so at some point, right, he's clearly already beginning to sort of figure out who he is, I think, right?
So he's fully human, or but only partially?
No, he's fully God too, but this is what the Bible tells us in a couple of different places. The big one is the book of Hebrews, but also Philippians. Like it goes on to say, he emptied himself. So, I mean, he's God, but his divine powers are passive. Like, so he doesn't tap into it when he does all the things that he does, right? So, I mean, the most direct way I like to put this is, look at the things that Jesus did, like the miracle stories: walk on water, healing people, raising Lazarus from the dead, right? How does he do that? Where does the power come from?
Holy Spirit.
The Holy Spirit does it, right? Which this is the point I like to tell my college students and seminary students, which means you can do it too.
Right. The disciples do.
The disciples do it, right? That's the whole point. Like, so when he does those things, he's not doing it because he's God. The divine power is passive, right? He tells us he doesn't know things, right? Because during his earthly ministry, he's not tapping into that divine power. It's like it's purposely turned off. He's chosen to turn it off or not access it. So he's a human being who doesn't know that stuff, right? If we traveled back in time and met Jesus when all this is happening, right, he wouldn't speak English. We'd have to learn the language, right? Right? He just doesn't know it, right? He does now. I think he hears our prayers and can talk to us, right? But doesn't then. And this is the point, right? He has to grow up, and we get this. So if people were curious, and Luke at least gives us a story. He wants to tell us a story, in part because he's writing for probably an educated Greek-speaking audience, who they would expect, when you read a story about a great person, to get a decent picture of their background and how they grew up. So Luke goes and finds at least one story. Right? Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I have a question. I think it's in Luke, where he's at the top about the timing of the end time.
Yep.
And he says nobody knows.
It says only the Father knows.
And the Son doesn't know,
Yeah.
the angels don't know, only
Yeah.
the Father knows. Okay, so is he talking about the end times like we think about it today as the second coming of Jesus? Or is he talking about the end times the way the Jews thought about it?
I think he's talking about the fact that, like, what he's preaching is that the kingdom of God will come. And that's what both Jews and Christians think. When it's fully here, that's the end time, right?
But he doesn't know he's going to be part of it. Right?
Well, I think he thinks he's going to be part of it, but he doesn't know when it's going to happen, right? He does clearly, and again in Luke, about chapter 9, he starts telling them, I'm going to go down to Jerusalem and get killed. Like, he figures out that's what's going to happen, right? I don't think he knows how it's going to happen. He knows that if he goes down there and keeps teaching what he's teaching, the temple authorities are going to kill him, right? And this is when, kind of a deep reading of a scripture, and especially the Gospels, you got to pay attention to the patterns, which means you need to read it over and over and over again, right? But even here, right, what is he doing? When he's in the temple, right? We'll come back to the whole temple thing, right? When they didn't find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers, right? That's a very polite way of saying Jesus was schooling the teachers. Like, he's teaching them, right? And they're amazed at what they're learning from this 12-year-old boy, right? I was reading this week and I went, "Oh, my son is 12. This is right, right? And but I mean, this is the point, right? Is he's teaching them, right? And if we fast forward in Luke to the end of the book, right, in the last four chapters, 21 through 24, right? Chapters 21 and 22, he's in the temple teaching and in constant conflict with the teachers because they don't like what he's saying, right? And what do?
One more Bible.
Well, I mean, this is why he isn't getting killed, right? It's because that they don't like what he's teaching. And so by the end of chapter 22, Jesus is arrested. Chapter 23, we get the crucifixion. Chapter 24, we get the resurrection, right? But there's a pattern here of teaching. Now, the other pattern is, if we go to the very middle of Luke, right? What happens when something's lost? Think about the prodigal son. To be lost is to be dead. To be found is to be alive, right? I think there's all kinds of literary patterns that he's setting up right here at the beginning. Tim, you were going to say something.
A couple of things that struck me, but the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. And then you go to what you just said, where he was not only listening, but he was also asking questions. So, can we assume from that writing that he was being educated, even though his parents were poor?
I mean, they're poor, but one of the things this story tells us, and there's other things that point to it, is they're very faithful, obedient Jews, right? So they're going to Jerusalem every year for this festival, right?
Can we also assume too that he was brought up in a manner that he was allowed to question?
Well, it seems like that's the case, right? I mean, it's
funny that for centuries, even that we brought up children, they should listen and not question.
Yeah.
And yet this example here is that. I will say this at our dinner table on Sundays after my dad preached. We, even at night, we were always told we could question. And I just thought, so his upbringing was one where he was to be filled with the ability to question what was being taught, which I think is interesting, and his parents would be, that their household would be doing this.
Well, I mean, that definitely seems to be the case. Again, it's speculation, right? But even here, right, I mean...
Would that be, though, part of the tradition for Jewish boys?
I mean, so somebody brought up, like, Midrash. It was Linda. So if you go to, like, what contemporary Orthodox Jews do, they will go and study the Bible, the Old Testament for them, right, for us, and then the Talmud. And if you go to like where they're doing this, you usually will have two guys sitting at a table across from each other, reading the same text, and they're arguing. That's actually how they don't just sort of say this has authority, believe it. You argue about what it means and how to apply it. So the very method of learning and how you interact with your sacred text is different than, again, not all Christianity has done this, but there is kind of a pattern that we become very authoritative with the text of the Bible. Like, just believe it rather than, well, what does it mean? Why should I assume what you, the authority figure, thinks it means is correct? Right? There's more room there.
Well, didn't have interaction too. They wrote in the
right on the right. Well, and that's what commentary is, right? I mean, you write commentary on so the Talmud is a commentary on the Bible, right? And you then interact with it, and so that you as you go down the line, you interact with the commentary as well. You can disagree with the earlier authorities. Yep.
It just seems to me that from the very beginning, conception, God was involved with this family.
Yep.
So therefore, I think things may have been well said.
Well, and I think that's obviously also the case, right? Of, part of what happens in this story is like when Mary is astonished and gets after him, we who know the whole story, if we've been reading the gospel, ought to go, well, Mary, don't you know who he is? The angel told you. Right? So she should know who he is, right? But also, like, this is unprecedented. No one else has had to raise the Son of God before, so what would you do when he all of a sudden says what he says, right?
They had a synagogue.
Right.
What part did the synagogue play?
So, he, as a Jewish boy at this time, he would have gone and, he would have learned Hebrew, because his first language would have been Aramaic. He would have learned Hebrew to be able to read the Bible, right? Because he would go to worship, and a Jewish male, especially in a small little rural town like Nazareth, would be expected to serve in the synagogue and read the scriptures, right? Jesus is called a rabbi. He's clearly gone to school at some point. Like, he's been educated, right? I mean, he's not like just appearing on the scene and knowing everything, right? He's getting some kind of an education. Dale?
It makes me think of the book by Eli Wiesel.
Yep.
The Night is the name of the book.
Oh.
And it's early on, while they're still in their village, before they get exported to the concentration camps, the boy who's basically telling the story from an adult's perspective, talks about being apprenticed by a man of wisdom in the local synagogue. I think he was a special kind of teacher. So.
But they would have gone, we would call it like catechism classes or confirmation, but it would have been more intense, right? And he probably isn't going to school to learn math. He's getting a religious education, right? If he picks up a math, it's working with the dad cutting boards or rocks or whatever it is they're doing.
Very good place to learn.
Right. We get this a story, and it's clearly a story of him growing up. So I talk about the temple. If you read Luke chapter 2, the temple basically becomes a character in the story, right? At the very beginning of that chapter, they bring Jesus to the temple to be circumcised. We get Simeon, this old guy, Anna, this older woman. They both sing songs and basically say, this is the one who is to come, right? In a Jewish thought of this time, in particular, what's important about the temple? It's where God was. This is God's place on the earth. God's presence is to be found in the temple, right? Well, for Christians, where is God to be found?
Everywhere.
He's everywhere, but there's a particular place where God's presence is located.
In the church.
In your heart.
He's a person.
Jesus.
Right? Jesus is where God's presence is, right? I mean, that's like, I mean, this is why, I mean, think about what Jesus even says. In 3 days, this temple will be torn down and will be raised up again. Right? He is the place where God is located more than anywhere else, right? So, of course he's going to say, didn't you know where I'd be? I have to be about my Father's business. That's a better translation of this. I have to be about my Father's business. But he's going to be where God is, because where God is where he is. I mean, we could go around in circles with that. But this is what's being symbolized, right? This is why Luke in particular puts Jesus in the temple all the time. He's always teaching in the temple. He's always arguing with people in the temple, because that's where God is to be found. So of course that's where he is. Right? Because he's where God is to be found. Yeah.
You said he's always in the temple. I was just wondering if Luke puts special emphasis on the temple as a scene. So later on, we know about I'm forgetting his name, Matthew, or whoever it was that was made dumb. that happens in the
Yep.
temple. And then this story happens in the
Yep.
temple. There's a circumcision in the temple.
Yep.
But what are some of the later instances in Luke?
So especially in Luke, all the teaching he's doing and the conflict he's having with the teachers and the Pharisees is all happening in the temple.
Is that mostly at the end, like the last
Yep,
week?
the last couple, yeah. So, I mean, this is, and again, that's where all the, and he talks to them, so think about when he says to them when he's arrested, I was teaching in the temple every day. You could have arrested me there, right? Well, so, and what do? They go arrest him in the dark. Not, I mean, in a place where God is not. It's all symbolizing what they're doing is not, they're not where God is. Because they're not, and this is what he says in the John passage, like, you don't know the Father. I mean, it's, right? This is what the symbolism is. Yeah, right.
Two down here
Yeah.
are Pharisees talking to themselves,
Yeah.
where this one is gaping open
Yeah.
mouth
Yep.
at what Jesus was saying.
But if we think about, I mean, if we read all the Gospels together, which can be dangerous to do, but, I mean, he's not from Jerusalem. He's from Galilee, way up in the north, right? He's from, like, the upper peninsula. I mean, it's where he's from. It's from, like, a rural area, right?
Tom Cook,
Right? And that's where, I mean, most of his ministry, so think of all the things he does on, like, the Sea of Galilee. That's way up north, right? He really only comes down to Jerusalem every now and then, right? And then at the end, he's there, of course, because he's there for the Passover, right? And he gets killed. But I mean, Luke intentionally sets his gospel up to focus on Jesus being in the temple. Like, he moves things there. If you read Mark or you read Matthew, there's a lot more going on up in these rural places, right? I think it's because Luke wants us to. I mean, each of the gospel authors has a different interest. There's different things they want to emphasize, right? And Luke is really, this is how he's making these connections to who Jesus is, right? They very rarely, I mean, only John really comes out and explicitly says, hey, this guy's God, right? The other ones make us figure it out by making connections, right? So when we get this young Jesus, he's very precocious, right? But notice he's never disrespectful, right? He's obedient through and through, right? I mean, he does. So when he says to his parents, "Why were you looking for me? Didn't you know I had to be about my Father's business or be in my Father's house?" Right? It's not snarky. It's not sarcastic. It's a genuine question of, "You should have known I'd be here."
Which means they had an inkling.
Right, right, and then what does it say? He went down. I mean, he just goes with them immediately and obeys. Yep. Okay, sorry, I didn't see it.
In verse 46, after 3 days they found him in the temple.
Yep.
Is that kind of foreshadowing the time between the?
I think so. I mean, I think that the gospel authors like to do those kinds of things, right? And again, if there's a theme in Luke, which I think there is through and through, of being lost means you're dead, and being found means you're alive, right? Well, what happens here? We get a Jesus who's lost for 3 days. He's in the ground for 3 days, and then they find him, right? He's raised from the, I think there is an intentional allusion, right? We think that stuff's weird, but they didn't. They wrote this way on purpose.
But what do you think Joseph thought? I have to be in my Father's house.
Well, but Joseph knew that Jesus wasn't his biological son.
Well, he's his father.
Right.
It still would have been for Jesus a biblical injunction
Right.
to obey your parents, and obeying your parents would generally be construed to mean if we're on a vacation or a religious pilgrimage when it's time to go and the family is leaving, I'm going to leave with mom and dad.
Well, so, but again, this is us reading our way of doing things into the text. So again, I mean, I think this is part of the powerful thing in this story. Like, again, I've read this story 100 times. You guys have heard it 100 times, right? It's a common story, right? But I read it really carefully this week, and it had been a couple years before I studied it, and it was the first time I started thinking about this really as a parent. To be like, what would I do if this was me? And we're on this big trip, and all of a sudden I realize I haven't seen my kids for a day. I would be panicked, just like they are, right? But, right, well, exactly, that's what we would do, but we need to understand, they're clearly traveling in a caravan, right? It's a three-day trip on foot from Nazareth to Good Jerusalem, right? They've done this multiple times. He's 12 years old. They've probably done it every year that he's been alive, right? Well, except for early when they're in Egypt, right? But they probably just assumed he's with an uncle or a cousin, right? And then they were like, hey, we haven't seen Jesus in 24 hours. We better go figure out where he is. And then they can't find him, right? But he doesn't ever do anything here that's disobedient, right?
Then why is she astonished? And they turn her,
well, because I think they would have thought, why didn't you come find us, right? Don't you know what's going on? And part of what's being depicted is he's doing what God the Father told him to do, which is go, what is Jesus going to do? He's going to be in conflict with the scribes and the Pharisees in 20 years from now. Right? It's setting that up. That's one thing, right? It's putting him in the temple, which is the place he's supposed to be located, right? And of course, what he's doing, what he's going to do with his life is going to upend all of this. The temple's going to get destroyed, right? Judaism is going to get split between followers of him and those who don't, right? It makes a sense to have this. It makes a sense by first century literary standards to have this kind of a story sort of preview everything that's going to happen. And that really is what it's doing. It's setting up what's to come. Doug, you had your hand up.
But Troy opened his sermon with the fact that context of this losing him was pretty common. He kind of dispelled the idea that these were bad parents,
right?
That they weren't looking at.
Right, and this was normal at the time. This is, well, in a certain sense, Mary and Joseph are odd because they don't seem to live in either of their hometown when they're in Nazareth. They're from Bethlehem. That's where Joseph is from. But they would have, it seems like they have some family and friends, but Jewish life at this time, when we say it took a village, it's because half the village was your family. Right? You lived in a small little village. Your brothers and sisters were there, or maybe they maybe got as far away as the neighboring town. You had uncles and aunts and cousins. Everybody took care of everybody. You oftentimes lived in a home with your grandparents, right? So they would have been used to other people taking care of the kids. It's just that when they got to 24 hours and they hadn't seen him, they were like, well, where is he?
And also, Troy mentioned that in those days it was likely that men traveled in a group, women traveled in separate groups, so it could have been that they thought that the other had them.
And children could move back and forth, right? And this is part of what's probably going on here is if Jesus is 12, he's become an adult. So he's on the line from, he can go back and forth between the men's group and the women's group to only being able to be in the men's group, right? And so it could have very well have been, Mary thinks he's with Joseph, Joseph thinks he's with Mary, and he's back in Jerusalem, right? But he doesn't, I think it's clearly being portrayed, he has not done anything wrong. Of course, we believe he's without a sin, so he's going to be perfectly obedient to his parents, right? I notice that doesn't mean you can't question them, as Tim is pointing out.
Do you think the audience at the time, when they first heard the story, the mothers hearing this story, would have taken Mary's astonishment kind of the same way? That you're not where you're supposed to be.
She's clearly mad at him. I don't think there's any question he's mad at him, right? But she's mad at him because she's scared. Not because he's done something wrong, right? So think about, if your kid wanders off in the grocery store, your 3-year-old, right? It's not because they did something wrong necessarily. It could be because you weren't paying attention to the kid when the kid was looking at something and you walked away, right? The astonishment is like, what are they astonished about? Are they astonished that he's talking back? Are they astonished at what they're seeing him holding his own with these teachers of the law, right? It's like he walked into Harvard Div School and starts arguing with all the professors, and again he can hold his own with them, right?
When you're 12, maybe not many, but when you're 12, I remember being 12, and that's also a time where you kind of start feeling yourself out, and you're willing to kind of bend the rules, not come home on time and get in trouble for it, and go to the other side of town where you're not supposed to be. And so, it's almost normal adolescent behavior.
It's normal, but again,
it's a little abnormal, but it's normal at that age to say, I'm going to go check things out on my own here.
But again, think about us all as 12. I'm willing to bet all of us did things where, we went and did this kind of thing, where we went where we weren't supposed to go, and we knew we weren't supposed to be there, right? That's different than what Jesus is doing, right? They probably brought him into the temple, and they were somehow having some kind of he's becoming an adult, a ceremony, some kind of proto-bar mitzvah. And then they left and didn't see if he was going with them. He just stayed. He stays for 3 days.
I wonder how.
3 days. It's this, but again, they don't have the kind of economy that we have. Someone probably took care of him and fed him and said, well, his parents will be back to pick him up. Right? This isn't American capitalism where we expect to get paid for everything, right? This is not how it worked, right? So this, again, this is part of the issue of when we put this in just take the story and put it into our culture, we're like, oh my goodness, what did he do? But once we sort of realize their way of doing this isn't ours, he isn't doing anything wrong. If anything, it's his parents. They should have figured out where he was before they left. They just assumed he was coming along.
I was just looking at the window. I took pictures of it on Wednesday. I was just looking at the window again, and right now we're focusing on that temple. Jesus said, 12 years old, arguing with the scribes and Pharisees in the temple. But up at the top, Jesus is a child with his parents, and Samuel is being called. So both of those places, Eli doesn't know that all about Samuel yet. And Mary and Joseph don't know all about Jesus. So that's before the age of 12. Now in the middle we get the age of 12. And if you go to the bottom, these stories of Miriam, I guess it's Miriam receiving Jesus in the water. I
think it's Moses.
Yeah, right, receiving Moses.
Yep.
And the other one, I'm forgetting his name.
It's Naaman. Naaman's maid.
But there's water there.
Yep.
Now, chronologically in the gospel, we get Jesus at home before he...
I didn't pick up on that.
Now he's 12, and at the bottom, the
baptism. I think that's probably what it's doing, is telling a story, right? That's definitely what the window is doing. That's what this passage is doing, is telling this, a story of Jesus is going through all the things a little good Jewish boy would do, and he's growing, and he's faithful, and he's obedient. If we go to the other story, the other passage, right, there again we're getting a story of Jesus saying, here he's talking about God the Father, right? I'm doing everything the Father's telling me to do. I don't have my own authority, right? Right, and he's arguing with the teachers of the law, right? And we're getting into this whole thing about testimony, right? Of if you go to a court case, right, and someone witnesses, they give testimony. Jewish law at the time said you had to have at least two witnesses. You can't just have one. I can't accuse Tim of something and take him to court and be the only witness, because it's just my word against his. You gotta have two, right? And so these teachers are arguing with him, saying, "Well, who are you? You don't have any witnesses to who you are, right?" And so Jesus first brings up John the Baptist, right? John the Baptist testifies to me, but then he basically dismisses John's testimony. I don't pay attention to human glory, right? I mean, what he's basically doing here is saying, if I am who I say I am, God, right? No human testimony is worthwhile. Like, you can't, like, that can't be the legal testimony. Who can testify for God? God. Right? Only person who can testify for God is God.
He kind of said Moses could.
Well, he says, what does he say? He says, you search the scriptures to find salvation, right? And even Moses testifies against you. Because if you read those scriptures, you know who I was, is kind of what he's saying, right? So what does he end up saying? What are the testimonies he has? His own works, which could only be done by a person who's come from God, and the Father himself testifies, right? I mean, he's playing a game with them that you only get if you get Jewish law at the time, right? And they're just like, they're befuddled by him, because they're like, well, where's the God the Father to testify for you? And Jesus says, well, you don't know him, so you can't hear him, basically. I mean, this is either, it's kind of a trite thing to say. This is either the ravings of a crazy person, or it's true. Right? I mean, but again, notice what he's doing. He's constantly saying, everything I do because I'm doing it in obedience to the Father. The Father has sent me. The Father has given me power. Right? And I think there's some of the things I put on the back of the handout as a couple passages to point out. Like, right, one, when we get to the end of, let's say, the Sermon on the Mount, but also all throughout all of these Gospels, Jesus is oftentimes described as, they were astounded at his teaching because he spoke with authority. I think we're already seeing that in this first story. We're definitely seeing it in the John 5 story of Jesus teaches as one who has authority, but where is that authority from? It's from God, right?
Every time I try speaking with authority,
Right. And again, like on the very bottom of that back page, I talk about Jesus basically dismisses John the Baptist's testimony, right? And what does he say about John in Luke? He says, I tell you, among those born of women, no one is greater than John. So he holds John the Baptist quite high, right? He's right, greater than any other human being, Jesus is saying, in a certain sense. Yet the least in the kingdom of God is greater than he, right? So if you're going to be one of my disciples, you're greater than John the Baptist, right? But he's pointing out that I don't need John's testimony. I have the testimony of God the Father on my behalf, right?
It's interesting that he made the distinction of people who were born of women as opposed to... But
everybody's born of a woman. Well, he's born of a woman. He's born from Mary, right? Yeah. Right. Again, I think that's a stock saying, right? Everybody under the sun. Everyone who's born from it means everybody, right? That's what he's saying. John is the greatest.
Could it be an allusion to the new birth, like in John 3?
I think that's also what's going on, right? Is like we're going to be born again, born anew, right? Finally, I think the way to kind of end all this with a practical point. I'm looking at the time. What does the word Christian mean? Anybody else know what the word means?
Christians.
Bob? Little Christ, that's what it means. So a Christian is a little Christ, right? Well, I think that's, yeah.
He pointed out that symbol there, it means Christ.
Yeah, it's a Cairo, means Christos, right? Yeah. But I mean, if a Christian is supposed to be a little Christ, right? I mean, the Christian life is one lived in imitation of Jesus, right? We don't just follow what he says, we're supposed to live like him, right? So the takeaway here is we're supposed to be obedient the way he is. That's how we're supposed to live. I mean, this is really what all of this is doing, right? Yes, we're learning who Jesus is and what he's going to do for us, but the takeaway point for us is try to be like him, right?
At the very beginning, you emphasized obedience.
Yep.
What these having taught. At the time, I thought there's that passage in Hebrews where it says that he learned obedience through the things that he suffered. So I just want to throw that.
Yeah. Well, and
obedience.
Well, I think that's probably yes. Even Jesus had to learn, right? The difference is, I mean, he was never intentionally disobedient, whereas we are all the time. Right.
Shades of mine.
Right, yeah. So anyway. Comments, questions from you all? Sorry, I didn't really use the window too much today. Yep, Linda.
Why is Jesus Anglo-Saxon?
Yeah.
Yep.
Why is Jesus Anglo-Saxon?
Yeah, I mean, it's in some of the other windows. I think they do a better job, but this one I personally, I want to go look at the window to see how well this captured the actual hue. I was at a Presbyterian meeting yesterday in Wisconsin. And it was a beautiful old church building, built in 1868. All these beautiful stained glass windows, right? And everybody in the window was as white could possibly be, right? I'm just like, well, yeah.
These were done in the 50s,
But
right?
so were these ones.
It's only
Right?
recently,
Yeah.
it's only recently that we fought against.
I mean, that's why. I mean, I have said, like, in some of our other windows, I'm impressed at how forward-thinking they were. That we do have so many non-white people in them, because I mean, who was living in Grand Haven in what was this? 1955. I mean, right? So yeah, I mean, I think we can be critical of them to a degree and say, like, we wish they'd have done better. But that's also because, in a certain sense, we've grown in wisdom and obedience.
Something that took a little bit for me to figure out this is rather abstract.
Oh yeah, right.
Some of it isn't. Some of it looks, like what you're used to seeing, but other, what is that?
And you have to.
Oh, that's a man.
And you have to know the Bible stories. Like, I mean, I will confess, like, looking at the things on the bottom, like the Samuel one and the Moses one, I immediately saw. Those are super common Bible stories. But when Naaman's maid, like, I know the story, but it's not something I just start thinking about randomly. It's a pretty obscure Bible story, right?
They give you a hint that says
I don't think they're doing that, but right. I mean, I can get it. Yes. Anyway. Okay. See you next week.